Welcome back to another episode of the Bulldog Blitz. I'm Liam Hickey, joined by Liam Cohen, and we have a lot of ground to cover as we approach the final stretch of the high school basketball season. We'll recap some of the biggest holiday tournaments that occurred around the Christmas break. Let's talk about have a Mr. Basketball conversation, talk about the current rankings as they stand as well. A lot has been shaken up. Wow. Some big headlines, a lot of new teams that have emerged from these tournaments. And we'll also give a preview of the Homewood Flossmoor MLK invite. So a lot to cover today, and we'll start by running through some of the holiday tournaments that occurred over Christmas break, over the holidays. Many consider these tournaments to be the premier events of the high school basketball season, and I'd say for good reason. They're a really good midseason marker for a lot of teams. They have huge implications on state rankings and end-of-season player awards, and they also give us a midseason preview of potential playoff matchups for the future. We actually spoke with Coach JD in our interview, and he's talked about just how much he wanted to win the Big Dipper. Gave them a nice break from their endless run of play in conference, and it's just a really nice switch of the pace. And so, unfortunately, they did not, and we'll get to that in a second, but we'll start with the Pontiac tournament, where DePaul came out as victorious.
Yeah, this was actually the first time in tournament history where two private schools were the finalists. It was Bennett versus DePaul. This game really came down to the final minutes and final seconds, too, as DePaul was able to edge Bennett 59-56. In this big championship game. But the thing that everyone wants to talk about is what happened in the Bennett-Simeon game.
Yeah, the biggest headline is how Bennett got to the finals, and that was in a contentious 67-66 overtime win against Simeon. And it led to Simeon head coach Tim Flowers pledging that they will no longer participate in the Pontiac after a historic run in the tournament where they won so many countless championships. And it was all because of a controversial double dribble call.
Yeah, and then that ultimately led to another foul that left junior Jaden Wright at the free throw line, who was able to shoot 3 free throws and actually sunk all 3 of them, giving them the 67-66 lead and sending them to the championship.
Yeah, Jaden Wright really had a breakout tournament for him. He was the first team all-tournament last year as a sophomore. This year he did not, but he still had some big showings in both the championship and the semifinals. Finished with 16 points in this game. Also, big shout out to Lorenzo Shields on Simeon, who led Simeon with 21 points. He noted actually a 3-point buzzer beater to send that game in overtime to begin with. So a huge game there. And then on the other side, you had DePaul beating Curie 68-64, actually fending off a comeback by Curie in the final minutes to advance. And then, just a great overall game in the finals for both teams.
Yeah, we had senior Blake Fabemi, who actually won tournament MVP. He dropped 21 points in the semis, 20 points in the finals. And then they also had SIU commit, who stands in at 6'9", Daniel Poliokonis, probably said that wrong. And they also had junior Jaden Wright, who was all tournament last year, as we just talked about. And their up-and-coming star, the 7'2" junior Colin Stack.
He was a big menace for Bennett. Has been a big menace all season. But big credit to DePaul, who had Rashawn Porter, 6'7" senior, that was able to limit him in the paint. He dominated this matchup, scored 17 points. Colin Stack only had 8. And DePaul also just has immense talent throughout their whole roster. There's so much depth, which is why they're currently ranked number 1 in the entire state. They also have junior A.J. Chambers, who was named all-tournament. He actually, unfortunately, came down with an injury in the first half of this game, but he was still named to the all-tournament because of how influential he was the whole run of games they had. Also, junior Raikan Wu, who is creating a big name for himself this season. He had 14 points in this game. And they also have a Western Illinois recruit, Makai Kavami, as well. So both teams really have 4 players in their starting 5 that are just absolutely gross, and the reason why they're having so much success.
Yeah, without a doubt, as DePaul did win in their first year in the Pontiac tournament. They have back-to-back holiday tournament wins. They won the Hinsdale Central Holiday Classic last year. So this team's up and coming, and as we were talking about the people in the starting lineup, you have guys that are still juniors like Raikan Wu, who has really taken over this DePaul offense. This team will be a scary team to look out for the next couple of years.
And then on the other side, you have the 3 Falls of Bennett, who are suffering from Jim Kelly syndrome. They have now lost the championship in the last 3 consecutive years, unfortunately. However, I still think it's looking up for them. They seamlessly transitioned from the absence of Gabe Solarski, who was so prominent and dominant for them last season. He's gone, but they have guys like Blake Fagbemi and Jaden Wright stepping up for them, and I think they'll be in just fine shape coming up. And then Simeon won the 3rd place game, beating Curie 65-49. Wasn't really close. Curie have been struggling a lot because they've lost William Gonzalez and Carlos Harris, who both went D1 last year. Simeon And Gary, both of these teams have combined to win the tournament in the last 13 years. So it's really been a Farmers League up until this point. And now we finally have some new blood, some new faces etched onto that trophy.
Yeah, the Pontiac tournament has always been a good tournament to watch, and it seems like it's just even getting better with these private schools now entering and even taking the crown. But now let's move on to the Big Dipper. As we talked about, Homewood Flossmoor did not walk away with the championship crown. It was Rich Township, the team of winter break.
Yeah, they're a team of destiny right now. They're the biggest headline by far in probably all the Chicagoland area because of how they've come onto the scene in these last few weeks. They had a crazy run, first beating undefeated Kenwood at the time, 87-84, and then beating HF in the finals, 81-67. And what a finals game this was, as the court literally had to be cleared out in the stands. Fire marshal was saying people had to leave because people were sitting in the aisles. It was so crowded, absolutely insane. But talking a little bit more about Rich, they were 7-4 going into the tournament. And now, ever since one of their players said they had a little Christmas team bonding activity, they've gone undefeated. They're now 12-4 and ranked as the #2 team in all of the Chicagoland area.
Yeah, definitely the biggest jump that we saw over winter break. I mean, this team really just flipped a page in their book, and it has worked out great. I mean, recently they just beat 2 teams from New York. And let's talk about their tournament MVP, Al Brooks Jr., who dropped 12 points, 15 rebounds, and 4 blocks in the final.
Yeah, he was instrumental in his role. But what's also a little surprising is that Jamson Coulter, another one of their star players, did not win the tournament MVP because he dropped 30 in the finals and 26 in the semis. He's been kind of their three-point shooter, so maybe it's because they're giving the award to a guard that's maybe more influential in the build-up play. But still, I think Jamson Coulter also deserves his flowers equally. But Al Brooks Jr. has been the star that's been grabbing all the headlines. But what people don't know is that he also has a younger brother, Ike Brooks, who has been just as important. Not been scoring as many points, but he's been a great role player for the starting 5. And a reason why they're doing so well, I think the Brooks brothers should get an NIL deal with, of course, the fashion company.
Yeah, that would be great to see. These Brooks brothers transferred over from Hansberry. They are a CPS school that was formerly in the same conference as TJ Seals from Kenwood.
Yeah, we talked about that last episode, the Noble Conference, how people were literally sitting in empty field houses. It was way different than the CPS basketball we know now that they're playing.
Yeah. But yeah, Rich Township, their head coach, Lou Adams, obviously wins the coach of the tournament, really coming in as one of the underdogs and coming out with the crown is very impressive to see from this team. As we talk about the third place game, Kenwood beat Hillcrest 72-66. That game got a little pulled away at the end. Jaden Tyler, Aiden DeRose, Al Brooks, Jamson Coulter, and Devin Cleveland and Alex Alston are all those named to the all-tournament team. This tournament was a fun one to watch.
Very fun. Alex Alston, another surprising admittance into the all-tournament team, considering that he really did not have an impressive tournament considering the amount of points he scored. He's probably the 4th leading scorer on his team behind not only Devin Cleveland, but also Amari Williams and TJ Seals as well. He's been having a little disappointing season for his standards, considering that going into it, he was ranked as one of the top seniors in his class for Illinois.
Yeah, that's something we're going to touch up on later in this episode as we get to our who could be the player of Illinois. As going into the season, many people thought it would be Alex Alston, but he's kind of been overshadowed by sophomore Devin Cleveland, and it really hasn't really affected them much in their successful season, but it has affected Alex Alston for sure.
And then another player that's not only putting Illinois on notice, but probably the whole nation on notice is Davion Thompson, who led Bolingbrook to beat Fenwick 54-48 in the final of the Jack Tosh tournament. What a game this was. And once again, it was all about, well, not just the finals, but also the semifinals, as Davion Thompson had a flu game performance, beating Metamora 61-47, thanks to his outstanding play in the second half. He started off slow, only scored 4 points in the first 2 quarters, but then helped his team by scoring 14 points in the next 2, finishing with 18 points and helping his team surge past Metamora when they were down by 10 at halftime.
Yeah, a seriously impressive tournament from Davion Thompson. I mean, playing with the flu, I mean, a stomach bug is never easy to even run through, but let alone play in a semifinal and partially championship game with the flu. That's another thing. Well, let's talk about Fenwick. Fenwick has kind of put all of Illinois on notice as they have established their offense and mostly their defense through a 4-star, I believe 5-star now, Nate Marshall, committed to Michigan. He's a defensive lineman, just kind of doing all their work for Fenwick as they actually took a loss over Whitney Young over this winter break. And Michael O'Brien didn't even consider the loss because Nate Marshall was at the All-American game.
Yeah, it just speaks volumes to how important Nate Marshall is to this team. out of nowhere, they've just become a 3A state title contender because of their tough brand of defensive basketball that they've come to embody in their play. And Nate Marshall has been the leading factor in that, getting all the blocks. You may not see him as well on the score sheet, but he's there in every single game. He's a presence. He's getting those blocks, those steals, that defensive hustle that the team needs, and that Dominic Dupree and Ty Massavriola can follow off of to score those points for Fenwick. So it was a great game between both teams. Bolingbrook, however, won that final because of the depth that they showed in this game, because not only do they have Davion Thompson, but they have Brady Pettigrew, and we just discovered in this tournament that, JT Pettigrew, but it was Brady Pettigrew who was discovered in this tournament, the little brother of JT.
Yeah, both of those Pettigrew brothers were named to the all-tournament team alongside the 3 Fenwick players, which Ty Massavriola, Dominic Dupree, and of course Nate Marshall. Something I want to touch up on before we move on to this next tournament is that we were looking at the stats for this tournament a little bit earlier in this week, and I was wondering, I was like, how did Nate Marshall make this all-tournament team? This guy's not putting up many points. But then you get to the defensive side. It is very hard to get past a wall that Nate Marshall puts up. And when you look at the difference between Nate Marshall and Fenwick last year compared to how they're all experienced this year, as they all have 5 returning starters, this Fenwick team can have a deep playoff run in the 3A.
Absolutely. I think Metamora could be a team that they could come up against, and that was a team that did appear in the 3rd place game as well in this Jack Tosh tournament, so that could be interesting to watch for. But yeah, 3A is wide open.
Yeah, without a doubt. And now we're going to move on to a little bit of rapid-fire action as we head over to the Hinsdale Central tournament, as Hinsdale Central hands Brother Rice their first loss of the entire year in their home tournament, as Vinkus Buzelis, who was named the tournament MVP, dropped 18 points, had 9 rebounds, and 5 assists. He has been playing great on all cylinders around the court.
Yeah, and then he had some help from Michael Howell, who had a double-double in this game with 10 points and 10 rebounds. Talk about clutch. And then on the Brother Rice side, you had their 2 main guys. You have Marco Gonzalez as well as Jack Wegas. But Jack Wegas, he disappointed, shooting only 2 for 9 from the field and 6 points with 2 free throws. You live by the 3 and you die by the 3. And that night, it was not his night.
Yeah, I mean, Jack Wegas is a guy that transferred over from Hinsdale South, and if you look at Hinsdale South's record and the points that they've been putting up, they are seriously struggling without Jack Wegas. He was their only hope, and he came in to Brother Rice very strong. He was a slow-shade player of the week. It just was an off day for him, you know. Every basketball player has one. It just happened to be in the championship game of a big tournament. But I think Jack Wegas has really been a big improvement to this Brother Rice team, but just sadly, you know, bad game, came at a bad time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, he earned Slow Shade Player of the Week a few weeks back. He was an honorable mention, I believe, in All-State a few years ago, so he will definitely be appearing in many lists at the end of the season. But another team that put Illinois on watch, albeit they weren't in the finals of the Hinsdale Central Tournament, was Niles North. They have Hunter Galron, Reed Olson, and Yaris Irby, and they had a solid showing, beating Lane Tech 64-51 in the 3rd place game. They only lost to Hinsdale Central by 1 in the semifinals, and as deserving of how good they played, they actually had 2 players named to the all-tournament team. Same with Hinsdale Central and Brother Rice, showing that they can't compete with those top teams.
Yeah, I mean, it's rare that you see only 3 teams taking up the whole all-tournament team roster, and especially when 2 of the players are from a team that wasn't even in the championship. Niles North has been a sneaky underdog to look out for, as they have a couple of important games coming up later that we'll talk on later.
Yeah, and then we'll move to the Proviso West tournament, where Jackson Davis was crowned the tourney MVP here. Warren have had a lot of ups and downs, probably the most roller coaster season out of any team we've seen in the Chicagoland area. But this was a good tournament for them. They won it. They beat Lincoln Park in the final, beat Whitney Young in the quarterfinal. So they had to overcome some tough competition. Good for them. But one team that did not have to overcome tough competition was Waubonsee Valley in the Hinkle Holiday Classic, hosted by Jacobs High School. They rolled through all the competition. They're still undefeated on the season. They're the only undefeated team left in Illinois, sitting at 17-0. And yeah, they just absolutely rolled in the finals, beating Crystal Lake South 69-47. Not a single team in this tournament was even ranked in the top 25.
Yeah, if we want to talk about another team that wasn't ranked in the top 25, we talk about an underrated Peoria team who won the State Farm Holiday Classic, led by LaShawn Stowers. He has just been a force to be reckoned with all season, outside of the top 25, but they do have some impressive wins against Bolingbrook, who sits at the number 4 spot. There's a win, a little short win against Morton, 33-31. The down south Morton, of course, not our rivals and neighbors, because
Doing a little worse than that, yeah.
yeah. And then they did beat Metamora 55-42 on Tuesday, but they did have a downside game against Fenwick where they lost 42-28. Only putting up 28 points is not a good sign.
Yeah, another team to watch out for, and that's what's so great about these holiday tournaments is that it puts the state on notice about what teams to look out for going into the playoffs towards the end of the season. This is a great midseason marker for a lot of teams, and now we know what to expect heading into this final stretch. And now we'll go to some of the top non-tournament games to occur after the
Holiday tournament.
after the holiday tournaments.
Yeah, for sure. You know, this is always a big rivalry that goes on in the CPS division. It's always Lane Tech versus Whitney Young. But this year, Lane Tech was able to come out on top. Obviously, Whitney Young feeling the struggles without Raikan Wu, who is, as we know, on the #1 team, DePaul College Prep, who is actually the next team we're going to talk about. They beat number 10 Warren, or number 10 at the time Warren, 53-45, as Raikan Wu, who had an insane 2024 campaign, brings it right into 2025 with 25 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists.
Raikan Wu currently has an offer, a full scholarship offer from UC Davis all the way in California. But he's just established quite a big social media presence. I heard he's actually getting a documentary somehow coming out on YouTube soon.
Really?
He has a really big social media following. He posts every single one of his highlights after every single game on YouTube. So his establishment of himself as a brand could be a great help for him in maybe winning some of these postseason accolades, such as Mr. Basketball in the future, because that race is wide open, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, for sure. As we just touch on the 2 other players that were big hands in this win against the number 10 Warren is Makai Kavame, who had 9 points and 8 assists, a good stat line from him. And then senior Rashawn Porter dropped 11 points and 9 rebounds, the big body in the paint.
And then moving on with Rich Township, who just continues their hot streak after beating Kenwood, then Homewood Flossmoor, and then Niles North. They go and they beat Kankakee in a close one, 67-65. Great performances from Al Brooks, showed why he deserved that tournament MVP with 21 points. Coulter added 17, and Jaden Williams had 13. He's another important player in that team. He's probably the big trio right there of Williams, Coulter, and Brooks. But then on the other side, you have Kankakee, who is a very formidable team led by Lincoln Williams, who we discussed earlier. He's a great player that is often underlooked in this immensely talented sophomore class right now. But he's up there once again with some of the bigger names. He had 16 points in this game, but it was not enough to beat the Rich Township Raptors.
Yeah, these Raptors are rolling as of right now, and just like them, we're going to roll into the current rankings. As sitting in the #1, we know it's DePaul College Prep, who plays Mount Carmel tomorrow, which is Friday, but they also play Vashon High School, a Missouri high school team, who is #1 in Missouri and number 31 ranked nationally. This could easily be the game of the year taking place at the MLK Invite at Homewood Flossmoor.
Yeah, I could see this being the equivalent of East St. Louis versus IMG Academy in the football season. You have 2 powerhouses going at it from different states. This is going to be a blockbuster for sure. I mean, I'm excited to watch it at MLK because we'll both be there for it.
Yeah, this should be probably the best game we've ever watched high school-wise. Is sadly at Riverside Brookfield we don't get to watch that great of basketball, but this could easily be the game of the year, and I'm very excited to see what this DePaul College Prep team can do against out-of-state competition.
And then moving on to the #2 spot is Rich Township, now 12-4. They had 2 wins in New York, had a little business trip. They beat a top 15 team in the New York B East Division, or New York B Division, East Rochester. Don't ask me how the systems work in New York high school basketball. It's very convoluted, but they had 2 great wins there, and they're going to keep on rolling. Kenwood now sitting at #3. They dropped since the last time we talked about them. They used to be #1, but they have had some losses now, or just one rather. They're 16-1, but it was enough to drop them 2 spots.
Yeah, Kenwood has some important games coming up. They play New Trier, which isn't one of the more important games, but the most important one of this weekend is they also play Vashon High School. As we talked about, the 31 ranked team nationally. Kenwood has matched up pretty well against top teams in the state, where they have handed DePaul College Prep their only loss in the season, and they look to hand Vashon their first out-of-state loss, as Vashon is 11-1 on the year. So this should be another blockbuster game for Kenwood.
Yeah, can Vashon run the gauntlet against all Illinois teams? Because not only do they have these 2 teams that they're playing coming up, but they also already defeated Rich Township this season, and they gave Quincy, who was ranked in the top 10 earlier, their first loss of the season as well. So they're just looking unbeatable right now for Illinois teams.
Yeah, another team that's been looking almost unbeatable with Davion Thompson sitting in at the 4 spot is Bolingbrook. They're 16-2 on the year. They stay at the number 4 spot, excuse me. They had 5 games this week, including games versus Lamont and Bennett. As you know, we talked about earlier, Gabe Solarski, the transfer to Lamont, who gave RB 30, which was not a good sight to watch as an RB fan. But then they get to go face the number 8, Bennett, who lost Gabe Solarski and has been succeeding without him.
Absolutely. At number 5, you have Waubonsee Valley, who is currently undefeated. And although you may think maybe they should be a little bit higher, I would think 5 is a great spot for them. They still haven't played a lot of tough competition that a lot of these areas closer to Chicago have played because they're so close to one another. They had a very controversial win against Matea Valley in Naperville earlier on, which may have been the reason why they're staying where they are, because that probably should have been a loss. But they remain undefeated nonetheless.
Yeah, that controversial little 3-point foul at the end of the game on the game winner led them to the line. They were able to connect on some free throws and win the game. But let's move on to number 6, Brother Rice, who is 16-1. They host St. Ignatius this Friday, as their ranking does not change from last week.
Yeah, and then same with Homewood Flossmoor, who had a solid 3-win week. They remain unchanged as well. They have gotten back on track after losing to Rich Township. So it'll be interesting to see if they can carry that momentum into their hosting tournament, where they will play for the MLK weekend.
Yeah, and a team that's going to be there is number 8, Bennett, who was number 9 last week. They beat 3 good teams this past week, and they have some good competition coming up in this tournament. Yeah,
they'll take on St. Lawrence, actually, and they'll be a very good team. They actually upset Homewood Flossmoor earlier in the season, and so it'll be interesting to see if they can hold their own there as well.
Yeah, and the team that we talked about earlier was Niles North, one of the up-and-coming teams. They move up 3 spots from 13 to the 10. They have Lamont and Evanston this week. Evanston is a top 25 team. I think they are the 25 ranked team in the state. And Lamont is one of those sleeper teams that kind of revolves around Gabe Solarski.
Yeah, so that'll round out the top 10. I believe we got number 9. Number 9 is Lincoln Park currently. They beat Lane Tech, and they also won in New York, same with Rich Township. They lost in the finals of the Proviso West Championship to Warren earlier, but they also are a very good team that will be competing at the MLK Invite once again.
Yeah, now let's move on to our Illinois Mr. Basketball / our top recruits discussion. And let's talk about the main factor in this is that it will not be a senior this year. Last year, it came down to the top seniors of the 2024 class, whether it was Cooper Kosh, Lathan Somerville, Morris Johnson. Those guys were all studs last year. But this year's class has been quite disappointing with Ian Miletic, Dietrich Richardson, who goes to Manual in Peoria, and Alex Alston, as we already talked about, having a disappointing season. Those 3 have kind of already been kicked out of this competition.
Yeah, to put it in perspective, Mr. Basketball last year was Morris Johnson Jr., who went on to play at Illinois. He was ranked 30th nationally, the first in his class as seniors. However, now Ian Miletic, who is the number 1 senior in the class for Illinois, he sits outside the top 100 nationally. That just shows the disparity between the 2 classes of 2024 and 2025. So I agree with you. It definitely will not be a senior. I'm looking more towards the juniors and the sophomores. Speaking on the juniors, though, I think Rykan Wu definitely has a really good case.
Yeah, Rykan Wu has been Mr. Reliable for DePaul College Prep, as he put up 24 points against Warren, 17 against Curie, 25 points against number 2 Rich Township. This was before Rich Township had their hype, but this was their upset win. And he had 14 points against Mater Dei at the UIC tournament, and had 16 points against Kenwood. He's been there every game for DePaul.
I agree. I think the only thing hindering him is the fact that there are also so many other pieces on that DePaul team, which could take the spotlight from him in the race. You have A.J. Chambers, Rashawn Porter, who's a senior, actually, and he might grab more of that spotlight and more of the headlines for DePaul, as well as Makai Kavami, who is a D1 recruit. So I'm looking more towards the players like Jackson Davis and Davion Thompson, who are given the role as the star player on this team and allowed to run with it.
Yeah, Jackson Davis and Davion Thompson, this week they both hit 1,000 career points, and yes, they are both sophomores. This is an insane milestone for both of them. Davion Thompson did it just 17 games into his sophomore season. But let's touch up on Jackson Davis on his Player of the Year run so far. He was being compared to some high-end NBA basketball stars. He's been the Illinois Hoop Prospect Player of the Week, as he dropped 32 points, averaged 32 points last week.
Yeah, he's drawing comparisons to LeBron in his early years with the Cavs and the idea that he has no help whatsoever. Other key players on their team, such as Javarion Banks, have been out with injuries, and this has led to him being forced to take over. And many times, it's still not been enough. They've lost to Joliet West 80-66, and they also just yesterday lost to Lake Zurich. In this game, he was actually held to only 9 points. That's because he's the only one that's worthy of putting a man on, so they're probably double or even triple teaming him.
Yeah.
So he has to do it all by himself, which is leading him to have crazy point totals, like you said. He averaged 32 points last week, 38 points versus Joliet West, 17 against DePaul, 25 against Stevenson, and he was the Proviso West tourney MVP. So I think he definitely does have a good case, but Ward needs more team success, I think, for him to be considered.
Yeah, and let's talk about Davion Thompson, who has had team success as he has led this team to a 17-2 record. He had 35 points against De La Salle, including 8 3-pointers. He was automatic from above the arc. He was the Jack Tosh tournament MVP, as we touched on earlier. Had 17 points in that championship game, where he left for a little bit due to a wrist injury on a drive where he actually only left for 50 seconds as he wanted to get back in that game so bad. As we talked about, that flu wasn't going to stop him, and neither was this injury. And Davion Thompson is, if not the front runner, he's second place.
I agree with you. I think he's my pick to click currently. If the season ended right now, he is Illinois' Mr. Basketball as a sophomore, and he will probably be Mr. Basketball for 2 more years after that, just because of how dominant he is. And I attribute it also to the fact that he has this clutch gene that you just don't see at kids his age. He has the maturity of a senior in the fact that he's able to take over games in the dying minutes when his team needs him most. Like you said, he had that flu game where he turned the game around. They were down by 10 at halftime to Metamora. He came back, put 14 points up in the second half alone, and they win that game. He has an injury, he comes back in, and they beat Fenwick. It's just his relentless mentality and his ability to make plays in the final minutes, that clutch gene, that takeover mode, that separates him from other players on this list.
Yeah, it's a great mentality that he has, and it's a special one to see because it's rare that you see a high school player leave the game with a bag of ice on his wrist and then return 50 seconds later and then continue to dominate that game and then win tournament MVP that same day. But let's talk about another tournament or an invite. We're talking about the MLK invite at Homewood Flossmoor that we luckily will be in attendance at. It kicks off with 2 girls games. They got number 5 Kenwood taking on number 81 Bolingbrook in what should be a very one-sided affair. And then the home team, number 47 ranked Homewood Flossmoor, takes on 150 ranked Rich Township, which would be a very good game if this was on the boys' side. Very
good. And I'm not as well versed in the girls' bracket, but I would assume that the CPS schools probably have the better teams, and so that's why you probably see Kenwood ranked at number 5. I'd assume Simeon also has a very good girls' team from what I've heard. So definitely my pick to click to win this whole thing would be Kenwood. And
yeah.
I think they'll easily beat Bolingbrook, and I think Homewood Flossmoor will probably beat Rich Township, just looking at the rankings alone.
Yeah, no doubt. But let's move on to the boys' games, which is, the main event for why we're going. We're more intelligent in the boys' side. But starting off the day, around 2 o'clock, you got Bennett Academy taking on St. Lawrence on Saturday. Bennett Academy is in the number 8 spot, and St. Lawrence sits in the number 18 spot. This could be a very good battle as Colin Stack and Bennett have taken down number 23 Bloom, number 16 Simeon, and fell 3 points short of the number 1 team in the state, DePaul College Prep, while St. Lawrence has taken down number 7 Homewood Flossmoor, number 11 Fenwick, but they recently fell to number 9 ranked team in Missouri, Chaminade.
Yeah, that's a very good loss, I'd say. I have no problem seeing that loss on their schedule and still thinking that they're a very good team. They have E.J. Mosley, a senior guard for them, who is a current D1 commit to Purdue Fort Wayne. This team has shown resilience before. They've beaten Homewood Flossmoor, like you mentioned. I think currently Bennett are the leading favorites to win this game, but I would not count the St. Lawrence Vikings out of this game.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. I would not be surprised whatsoever if St. Lawrence pulls off an upset.
And then moving on, later that day you have Kenwood taking on Chaminade College Prep to end off that Saturday. Kenwood, led by Alex Alston, arguably, and Devin Cleveland. Yeah. They're 17-1, and they play Chaminade, who I think, out of Vashon and Chaminade at this tournament, Chaminade's probably the weaker team. I would probably give Kenwood the edge because of that.
Yeah, I mean, Chaminade obviously is a very, very tough team to beat from Missouri. They rank at number 9 in Missouri, of course, as Vashon ranks number 1. I do agree with you. Chaminade's probably the lesser team, and I would also take Kenwood in this game. But now let's move on to day 2 of the tournament, where Lamont takes on number 10, Niles North. Lamont, led by Gabe Solarski, haven't taken down any of the top teams, but they held a pretty close game.
So wait, didn't they play Riverside Brookfield? Aren't they top team in the state?
Yeah, so like I said, they haven't taken down any of the top teams in the state. Riverside Brookfield who got 30 from Gabe Solarski, is not one of the tougher teams in the state by any
in
means.
the consolation game.
Yeah. Well, they did hold a close game with number 18 St. Lawrence to try to look and pull off an upset, but they were unsuccessful. But Niles North has been the team that we said to put on watch. They beat number 16 Simeon and held tight games with DePaul, or number 1 DePaul, and number 13 Hinsdale Central, as they look to take down the Lamont Knights this weekend.
Yeah, the way I see it, I think Niles North will overpower Lamont. They have a trio while Lamont only has one guy, so I think that'll just be too much star power for Lamont to handle.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
And then now you have Bloom taking on Lincoln Park, probably one of the lesser coveted games of that day, but still smacked right in the middle of the schedule. I think it's going to be a blockbuster once again. You have Bloom led by Elijah Lovemore, who's proven he can be clutch before. He's a D1 recruit, and he actually knocked down a 3-point buzzer beater to help them beat West Aurora in overtime in the opening round of the Pontiac tournament. So he can prove he can be that guy. They play Lincoln Park, who's a very good team, ranked inside the top 10. This will be a good game once again. There's no bad games here.
Yeah, Liam and I last night were texting back and forth saying every one of these games were scheduled, I believe, prior to October. So, I mean, September was when the scheduling was made, and all these games fell into place perfectly. Like this next game we're going to talk about, the last game on Sunday, is DePaul College Prep, the number 1 team in Illinois, number 23 team nationally, takes on the number 1 team from Missouri, Vashon, and they're 31st nationally. Rycan Wu and DePaul have easily been the top team in Illinois, as they've just been the team to beat, only losing to Kenwood on what you could say was maybe an off day. They beat Mater Dei earlier this year and Rich Township, in Rich Township. But Vashon, led by the Williams twins, Trey and Mouse, which we just found out. Vashon's 11-1 on the season and took down arguably one of the top teams in Illinois, but they are from down south in Quincy, 59-56 earlier this year. This is easily the game to watch.
Yeah, Trey Williams is a commit to Missouri State, I believe, D1. A lot of D1 players at this tournament. And his brother Mouse, we've found it kind of funny because he's literally only 1 inch shorter than his brother. Yeah. And he got stuck with that nickname that he'll be having the rest of his life. So very unfortunate there. And then finally, day 3 of the tournament, you have Curie taking on Thornton in a big rivalry game for the Chicago Public Schools. However, this game did not fall into place as perfectly as other teams, where both teams probably have not lived up to expectations.
Yeah, I mean, Thornton Township really hasn't been a team to beat or a good team in recent time. But, you know, Curie should probably clean house with this game.
Absolutely. And then you have Kankakee, who we talked about before, led by Lincoln Williams. Some big names on that team. They play unranked Romeoville. Romeoville had a really good showing in one of the holiday tournaments, so not a team that really should be taken for granted. But give me Kankakee in this one as well.
Yeah, Romeoville is an unranked team, but they have played some hard teams. They look to end their 4-game losing streak where they've lost to Kenwood and Bolingbrook, obviously 2 top 4 teams in Illinois. So it's good that they're getting a taste of some harder competition as they come into an important game against number 17 Kankakee. But we'll take us to the last game of the tournament. It's Homewood Flossmoor, the host, facing off against Joliet West. Jaden Tyler and HF, who recently lost to Rich Township and to St. Lawrence earlier this year, have taken down Whitney Young and number 23 Bloom. They look to get another important win to end off their hosting tournament. And Joliet West has took down Warren 80-66 last Saturday, where they, they weren't able to hold off Jackson Davis, but they were able to hold off the rest of that team, which hasn't really been too hard. They lost to DePaul and Brother Rice, but they also beat that really good team everyone's talking about, Riverside Brookfield.
Yeah. If Jaden Tyler can play the way he's been playing and lead this team, and if Arden Eves, their transfer from Thornwood, can also keep playing the way he's been playing, Aiden DeRose as well, Homewood Flossmoor should have no problem in this game, especially because they're playing host. They're going to have the crowd behind them to help them out. But Joliet West, at the same time, is a very frisky team that I'm not sure on, because they can upset any team at any given moment. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They, like you said, they beat Warren. And also, they beat Riverside Brookfield. Yeah. No, but I'm joking. But they have Zion Gross, and they have Ethan Hillsman, 2 really good players. Ethan Hillsman's also a transfer, and I'd watch out for him. This is not a team that is a write-off in any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think the only game that we can write off for a win is Curie versus Thornton Township, but otherwise, every game should be a close one and could even result in many upsets this weekend. No doubt you'll be seeing most of these scores on Slow Shay. And that will wrap up our show for today.
Yeah, I mean, so many uncertainties, but the one thing you can be certain on is that the rankings will not be the same in a matter of a week. That's something that you can take to the bank for sure. So with that, that will wrap up our coverage of high school basketball. A lot has happened, and a lot will continue to happen as we approach playoffs. I'm Liam Hickey. This is Liam Cohen, and thank you for watching.